And we're here for another APTN Investigates retrospective, celebrating 10 years on the air for APTN Investigates. Cullen, welcome to Winnipeg.
Thank you.
And welcome to doing a retrospective.
Yeah, a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah, well, we were saying there's going to be a physical test, there's going to be math questions, it's going to be hard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm down for the physical. Math, I don't know.
Well, you were mentioning that you thought these interviews were very comprehensive. And, you know, usually we start with a little bit of history, but we're going to start before you were born. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Because you come from a storytelling family, as I've recently found out.
Oh, yeah, with my my grandfather, I guess, was quite the storyteller in his time. So is that what we're talking about?
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I actually wrote a short story recently that won a creative nonfiction, Indigenous Creative Nonfiction Award. It was published in Up Here magazine. Just basically about my grandfather's time when he was a young guy out on the trap line. So, you know, I got a real kick out of kind of stepping into his snowshoes and telling that story, and I'm proud of it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you should be. And you based it a little bit on, like, he had made recordings of himself telling stories?
Yeah. Well, with that, it was, he passed away in 2000, and before he passed away, he made all these audio recordings with a plan for an autobiography that he was going to put out. And it kind of never came to pass. He passed away, and my auntie had these audio recordings, and she was trying to get the book off the ground too for years. And I always kept pestering her. I was like, you know, I just wanted to hear his voice again. I wanted to hear these stories again. I didn't have a plan of, you know, writing his story or anything like that. It seemed like a daunting task. But I knew that there was just these little gems in there because he was such a great storyteller, and, you know, they were always really humorous most of the time. And I just wanted to see if I could find, you know, this little hidden gem in there, and you know, maybe write, you know, a couple short stories about it. That was my idea. Maybe put out like a little pocket book of some anecdotes of his. And so I got the discs right before Christmas, and then I found out about this writing award, this Sally Manning Creative Nonfiction Writing Award. And yeah, I thought I'd pick them back up again and see what I could find. And then I came across that story about this duck that he found on his trap line, and kind of taught it to hunt with him.
That was crazy. Yeah, it was because it had a broken wing. He heals it, and he ends up taking it hunting ducks.
Yeah.
Other ducks.
Well, yeah.
I was really conflicted about this story. It seemed so, like, wrong.
Yeah. And you know, with my grandpa's stories, like, you never know where, like, the BS started or the truth ended, right? So, and the way he told it in the audio story, I mean, it was just a little offhand story, and it was basically a couple lines. He just said, you know, he found a duck, broken wing, fixed it, and took it out hunting with him. And then one day the duck never came back, and somebody probably shot him because he was pretty tame by that point. So I fleshed out a lot. Like, it's really my story as well, right? Just because it was so short in the audio thing that, you know, I really wanted to kind of flesh it out and, you know, add my own humor to it. So my voice is in there just as much as his. I got a kick out of it. You know, I haven't really done any kind of creative writing like that. You know, I did some in university. And, you know, when I studied film and video production, we did some storytelling like that. But since I've been with APTN, you know, it's a completely different way of telling stories, telling people's stories. So it's just kind of cool to flex that muscle, right, and get those kind of creative juices flowing.
Yeah, well, and that bridges us into APTN. But, you know, I was saying before the interview, I was sitting there and I was looking, and I was like, you know, I don't think I know where Cullen went to school or where the path was that he decided to suddenly go to journalism. Because some people, like, go for it and this is what they want to do, and other people have completely fallen into it without having a plan. They kind of end up being journalists. And I don't know what your path was into journalism.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was always kind of a film buff and a film guy, and, you know, I was kind of the guy at school or in class that knew all the movies and, you know, the scenes and the actors' names and, you know, the runtime of The Godfather Part 2 and stuff like that. So when I went to university, I studied film and video production at the University of Regina. They got a real great course there. that kind of takes you through everything. Still photography, black and white still photography, I really got a kick out of. Then screenwriting, directing, they kind of take you through the whole gambit. How did I get into journal? Well, when I moved back to Yellowknife in 2008, my wife had finished university, and we'd planned to move back to Yellowknife, so we went back, and I was looking for just a camera guy job because, I didn't think about journalism or anything like that, but I liked film, camera work. And in Yellowknife, they got CBC North. As far as I knew, that was all that was there. And I think I applied for them, but I never really heard back. And one day I was doing deliveries. I just had, just a part-time job, just doing deliveries to put some money in my pocket. And I was doing deliveries to communications building downtown Yellowknife, and I found out that there was APTN office there. Right. So I just walked in, knocked on the door. The producer there at the time was named Norm Byatt, and he was the only guy there. He was just in his office, and I kind of introduced myself, and he gave me a little tour of the office there, and I just sat and talked with him. I said, I'm from Yellowknife, I'm from the north, and if you guys ever need a hand, maybe I can help you guys out. And he said, well, basically, at that time, a VJ position had just opened up. And so he was like, well, did you hear about the VJ position? I was like, I didn't really even know what a VJ was. So, he said, well, if you want to apply for that, we'll take a look. So basically, in the formal interview with him, I told him I didn't have any experience in journalism, limited experience kind of with cameras, and I wasn't sure what they were shooting with. But, I said, I'm from the north, this is my hometown, I know the people, I know the politics, I know the issues. And I said, just give me a shot. If you guys aren't happy with what I'm doing in a few months, I appreciate the opportunity, thank you. But I kind of knew I could do the job. And funny enough, this telling people stories, that part of it, talking to people, and writing scripts, that actually came relatively easy for me. It was actually the technical stuff, which I went to school for, the camera, how to hold a shot, sequencing. That's the stuff that took a little more time to learn. So if you watch my early stories as a VJ for news, there's I'm constantly zooming in, out, the camera's always moving everywhere, right? And I was like, what the heck was I doing? But yeah, they gave me the shot, APTN gave me a shot, and I've been here ever since. That was 11 years ago now.
Well, we just gave you your 10-year blanket. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's, some of them are coming a little late, so.
Yeah, it was almost a year late. Yeah, that's no problem.
But you're talking about, I wonder if the storytelling did come so naturally to you because you come from that storytelling background. On one hand, you say it's completely different, but there's some things about oral storytelling. When I was even just reading what you wrote, the story about your grandfather and the dog. It's you're thinking, well, it's very simple sentences, and there's a structure there to how you tell the story. You kind of say, well, I'm going to tell you this story now, and you've kind of got your intro, and you've got your tease, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got this narrative that builds. So do you think that just maybe Indigenous people having that background in oral storytelling are naturals for TV?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's a good point, yeah, and I think so. But now you mentioned, I didn't even think about that, the intro and stuff like that. And the way I did write it, it almost seemed like storytelling, the script, the way we lay it out for news. I know with that story, I don't want to focus on that story too much, but I kind of wrote it in his voice as well, just the style of it, right? So like you said, kind of simple sentences and what have you. It's kind of interesting doing that. But yeah, it's I've talked with a lot of obviously Indigenous storytellers over the years. And I'm always honored that they sit down with me and open up the way they do. There's a lot of trust there, especially with Investigates and the stories I've been telling in the last few years. There's a lot of trust that you have to build with who you're talking to get them to open up. A lot of times, about traumatic experiences, and so like I said, I'm always honored that they share their stories with me.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about Investigates and talking about also visual storytelling. That was one of the reasons that, like, I came on and you were working for news, and Investigates was doing okay, but the only person that they had in there that really had a television background was Todd. And so you had these like really strong investigative journalists, but they'd all worked in print. And what they were trying to do wasn't translating onto TV very well. It's different medium how people listen to things. When you go to write, you can write these big, long, run-on paragraphs in print if you want to. And people have a chance to pause, go back and reread. But when you're doing broadcast, people, I mean, I guess now they can pause and they can rewind on their smart TVs or whatever. But, you know, like, but typically people don't do that. Like, they want to be able to hear things as they're watching and not pause and rewind all the time, right? So you've got like this way of writing and this way of adding the visual elements so that they're watching and there's proof of what you're saying. If you say this town is full of drugs, but you don't see drugs, people can say, I don't know if that's true, but if you can demonstrate that visually. So you've got all those elements, and I felt like you were doing really well in news, and so I thought, well, I'll ask him. I asked you and Rob, do you want to move from news into Investigates? Investigates needs staff. You can try it out for a year, and if at the end of the season, if at the end of the season you don't like it, you're welcome back to come into news. You must have liked it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, you bring up a good point. The visuals, well, Investigates, you know, important show, great show. I mean, the visuals, they weren't there. And I don't think that's anybody's fault. And I still think that we're growing as a show as well, and we kind of get better every year. But I think that's what me, Rob, Trina now, we really brought kind of a visual sense to these stories. And you can have, you know, the most important gut-wrenching story in the world, but you know, if the visuals aren't there or if the character is not there, then you know, why am I watching it? And you know, when I first started with Investigates, you know, I still think I was a little green. I mean, I think I'd been with the company for 4 years by then, but you kind of jump from telling a 2.5-minute story to a 22-minute story, and trying to figure out how that's going to work and what you need to shoot to do that. So I think you know, I try to improve every year at that as well, and kind of bring my own sense to it. But yeah, the stories. I mean, you need the visuals, and yeah, I think me and Rob, that's what we're kind of pushing for. Was, you know, let's get these visuals bumped up a little bit. Let's take a little more time setting up lighting, or you know, getting those community shots that you need. You know, going out when the sun's setting to get that sunset shot, or you know, for the sunrise shot, right? Just going that extra mile to tell a visually compelling story. Yeah.
And you mentioned also you know, characters, and I'd say there's also moments, and this is maybe a little harder to do sometimes in Investigates. Like, we're going to talk in a moment about Against Their Will, and some of that is historic. So we talk about there being these moments, like if you see somebody you're doing a story on somebody who's very frustrating, and they break the chalk in the classroom, or they throw their pen across the room. That's just kind of like that moment that you're there for, that really shows people how this person is feeling. Maybe it's a hug, you know, from a family that's been reunited. And so that brings people along, because TV in the end, and storytelling in the end, is about people and emotions. We're dealing with facts, but we're dealing with people and the people most affected. So I guess where I'm going with this is when you're doing a story like Against Their Will, there's history there. Like, there's moments that as opposed to daily news gathering where you're out and you're gathering the news as it happens, you're now telling a story that's happened a little bit already. So maybe what we could do first is we could set up the story, and then we could talk about what you capture and what you have to fill in.
Well, the story itself was about these 3 women who were sterilized against their will at the Royal University Hospital in Saskatoon. The story itself, maybe just a little backgrounder on the story. I think one of the women had reached out to us. She called up our producer, Paul Barnsley, and kind of shared her story with him, and you know, I think Paul relayed it back to me. And you know, I started doing research. I came across a lot of great work that Betty Ann Adam did with the Saskatoon Star Phoenix, and yeah, she essentially broke that story. You know, but I find that not with the Saskatoon Star Phoenix or anything, but with other media, bigger media organizations, sometimes they'll break these stories, important stories have to do with Indigenous people, but then the story just kind of ends there, and it just kind of gets lost in the 24-hour news cycle, or it's never really focused on or given as much attention.
They don't follow up.
Yeah.
They don't follow up, and they don't go back.
Yeah, or just give it as much attention as it deserves. I mean, these are Indigenous people, you know, in the 21st century that are being sterilized against their will. That requires more than, you know, than just you know, a news headline that's forgotten the next day. So sometimes, you know, I'll pick up on these stories and you know, that I feel just deserve more attention, and that's what I felt with this one. I was like, well, this is ridiculous. This is mass injustice that's going on. Sorry, I forgot the original question.
Well, it's just saying, like, if we set it up, and we should say there's actually a lawsuit involved, and we have to be a little careful as we're talking, because more victims have come forward, and the courts have decided to now put a publication ban on names. And we were discussing just before we did that this Supreme Court case that applies to the idea of unpublishing. Back in the days, they would put like a publication ban on, and you didn't go back into the newspapers and erase people's names if you'd already published them. So, but going forward, we actually can't name the women now.
Yeah.
So these women were going in, having babies, and people were applying extreme pressure on them to sign, I guess, consent forms to get sterilized. And one of them comes forward and kind of whistle blows that this going on. And I guess, you know, like when you're dealing with this story, I mean, it doesn't have it doesn't have like really an ending yet. It's certainly not going to be a happy ending, because this is not reversible. What is the takeaway from the story?
You know, the story, it was it's just mind blowing that something like that can happen in Canada, like today. I guess it just goes to show that these kind of injustices that are historic as in one point are still happening today. We got to be mindful of that. Again, with the women that you know that we spoke with in the story, again, I was just honored that they, you know, shared their stories with me, and it required like a lot of trust. You know, long before I turned the camera on. And because I'm a VJ, you know, I don't show up with a massive film crew. I don't have, you know, a lighting guy, a camera person. It's just me and my equipment. And long before I set up the camera with each of them, we just sat down and talked. And I had to almost, even though we had connected before on the phone, I had to rebuild that trust almost. We almost like sat like this for, you know, half an hour to an hour, where I just had to assure them that I just wanted them to tell their stories, and that they were in a safe place, and that I wasn't going to use any clips of them that would diminish their stories. So,
yeah, because they're in a really vulnerable position, and I think have been, like, you can see it, and you can see one of the women's crying as she retells her story, and it's really hard, I think, for any woman, but particularly Anishinaabe women, to, like, you know, things with our children are just like the most violating things that you can do to us. Yeah. So you know, maybe the ending there is that, like, at the end, it's a story really also of resilience and about the strength of these women coming forward.
Straight up, yeah, exactly. And I kind of wanted to show that as well. You know, there are shots in the piece, you know, where I did show them as strong women, and, you know, fighting back against the system and this injustice that was done to them. So, you know, I hope that comes through in the story as well. you know, in the end of the story, I also went to the you know, the health region and the hospital staff to just find what the hell happened. And you know, I think they just gave kind of you know, they apologized. They said, you know, these women experienced pressure, and for that we apologize, something like that. You know, looking back at the piece now, you know, I kind of wish I would have grilled them a little harder and maybe not accepted that standard answer that they gave me.
Well, it's hard, you know, when they know a lawsuit's coming also, they're going to be very careful in what they apologize for and be strategic about it, because I guess the fight is going on. And, you know, because these women are coming forward, they're seeking justice. And I think just trying to, you know, make sure this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, that was a big thing that each of them told me was, yeah, exactly, that you know, that it doesn't happen to any other women. So it's definitely not just about them. It was about the fact that it was still happening and that it wasn't right, and it's got to stop.
So important story, and important story for you to be the vehicle for. And I just want to thank you for popping back to Winnipeg and talking to me today.
Thank you.